We are back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Have Democrats lost the Deep South for good? A lot of people think so. A lot of people assume so. A lot of Democratic Party organizations, even within some of the deep Southern states, have pretty much given up hope for winning certain parts of their own states or their own electorates. My next guest has a different view. She also recently experienced something that any up-and-coming political figure would, or many would kill for, which is a major profile in the New York Times, headlined, "The youngest state party leader in the U.S. has a blue-collar blueprint." My guest, Anderson Clayton, is the relatively recently elected chairperson of the North Carolina Democratic Party. She won that position at 25 years old, making her the youngest chairperson of a state Democratic Party. She's been a volunteer and an activist and a staffer, as well as a party official in that state for some time now. And she joins us to discuss the question of what, if anything, can Democrats do to win back the Deep South? So first of all, Anderson Clayton, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for having me on. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, well, we're delighted. First of all, one of the things I learned about North Carolina politics is, correct me, of course, if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, the Democratic Party didn't even contest a number of races for the state legislature last year, did they?
We left 44 seats uncontested last cycle. And that was a travesty on both ends, because we saw in 2018, when the state party made a really concerted effort to contest every race up and down the ballot for the state house and state senate, that we had a significant win, obviously, right? We broke the supermajority in 2018. And just last week or 2 weeks ago now, I guess my brain is kind of losing time, to be honest with you, because everything is running together in North Carolina right now. But Representative Tricia Cotham out of Mecklenburg, who was a Democrat, switched parties and gave the supermajority control back to the Republicans, unfortunately. And so we really saw the lapse in that and the downgrade in what happened in North Carolina. You know, in 2022, Sherry Beasley won 5 House districts that we lost by 500 to 600 votes for the state house. And so we have a long way to go, but also really good opportunity points to make sure that we're taking back what we lost in this past cycle and this year, honestly.
Now, you hear a lot of people say, Anderson, that particularly in the South, that rural counties are a write-off. That, look, we only have so much money, we only have so much resource, we're not going to get those counties and those people, so let's hold on to what we've got and throw it at... Now, I'm not saying this is my position, mind you, but we hear this a lot. Let's throw the resources at races we can win, and those aren't them. What do you say to that argument?
I say that people like that are like me are in rural North Carolina. And in particular, I think that we often, and I know that we do this, we equivalent rural with white. And in the Deep South, like we're talking about, right, that's not the case. There's a lot of majority Black and brown communities that exist in North Carolina, and 30% of our population. And I really do believe that there's a way to tap into communities that haven't been tapped into by our party before. North Carolina has the second highest rural population of folks, right there below Texas, honestly. So Texas obviously has the highest population of rural voters, but North Carolina has the second highest, and that's because we have really dense rural populations of folks that have lived in these communities their entire life. And before I became state party chair, I was the local party chair in my home county of Person County. And Person County to me was a place that I grew up thinking I had to leave, you know what I mean? Like get out of, because there were nobody there that really talked like me or had ideas like me. And one of the things that I tell folks often is that, it took being dropped on a national campaign in a tiny town in rural Iowa for me to realize that, there are Democrats everywhere, and we just have to activate them. We have to talk to them. We have to let them know that it's okay to be a Democrat and call yourself that again, because we left communities behind a long time ago. And I think that it stopped people from really feeling like they could own their own political power. And that to me is needed everywhere. And so organizing everywhere is a priority for me, regardless of what your address is, to be honest with you.
And, that's actually an interesting point. I'm originally from upstate New York, and the rural counties up there can feel much the same way. Maybe not as extreme as here, but people think of New York as Eastern industrialized liberal state, which it tends to be in the main, partly because New York City's population is so big. But
they ain't never been to upstate New York, then, have they?
No. When I was growing up there, I worked on a horse farm. And at that time, New York State had more horses per capita than any other state in the union. So, something people wouldn't have thought of about New York. I guess that gets to the point. I mean, there's a lot we can talk about, but why don't we start with, you raised a great point, which is, whether you call yourself a Democrat, a progressive, a liberal, just not a MAGA hat wearer, whatever you call yourself. In fact, it can feel kind of lonely, I think, to be in certain parts of the country, certain parts of your state, and elsewhere. It's not going to feel lonesome in Raleigh-Durham, but it's going to feel lonesome in a lot of, the Carolinas and elsewhere. What's your experience of that? What do you tell people about that? Because I'm sure a lot of people think, well, nobody thinks like me here. I feel alone. They think I'm a communist if I say I'm not voting for, whomever. How do you motivate people to stay? How did you stay?
Yeah, I mean, I worked, as I said, on national campaigns, and I actually made the decision to come home in 2021 after the 2020 election cycle. I got really fed up, to be honest with y'all, about with national politics. I just thought, no one really wanted to come in and invest in organizing in the way that I saw it to be. And for me, I realized I'm the only people that can really have a good impact and a good effect are the folks that live there already, that are folks that are from that community, or the folks that have a stake in what the future of that community really looks like. And so when I came back home, I told folks, I don't care if I never win an election in rural North Carolina. It wasn't about that for me. It was about giving people a choice. And it was about making people understand that, democracy is not democracy without choices, and that everybody deserves somebody to vote for rather than against. And I think that that's something that we have to take. And in these areas that we've written off, or that we don't think that there are people that think the same way that we do, building community is the first thing and the first principle that I feel like the Democratic Party has got to get back to, and really energizing folks around a belief and a vision and making something better and putting that out there. I don't feel like we do that. And when I was in Iowa, I sat there and I was like, man, I'll never find a Democrat that lives in Benton County, in Belle Plaine, which is where I got dropped into, right? I lived with a pastor named Kate in a parsonage there, and she was amazing and taught me so much about the people that existed there. And I found Democrats that were nonprofit leaders, or that had just been, quiet about being a Democrat. They voted every election cycle, but they never tried to get out and knock a door or talk to their neighbor about how they felt about politics, because everybody around them just seemed to be like, you can't say that here, or you can't do that here. And I think it's giving people the energy and the youthful motivation, because I think it comes from the young people that are like, we're fed up right now, and we don't have to be silent anymore about how we feel about things. And we can say those things out loud, and we can give you that power back, because that's what this is. It is empowering our people to say we don't have to suppress ourselves. We don't have to deal with this Republican fear mongering anymore in places that should be ours anyway.
Now, and I want to get back to that question in a little while of, places that should be the Democrats, but you mentioned young people. Is it your experience in these parts of the country and in these parts of your state that younger people tend to lean more Democratic? Nationally, it's certainly true. Much more, left. The statistics show that voting, exit polling and so on shows that. But is it your sense, even in these rural counties, that you have younger people who lean more Democratic, or maybe more open than the older folks, or do they tend to have the same politics? And I'm specifically thinking of the ones who come up in the conservative community and the white community, so on. But also the black community, for that matter. Do younger people have a more liberal bent, if you will?
I think they would, and they will, if they know what the Democratic Party stands for, and that the Democratic Party is actually reaching out to them in these communities. I talk to a lot of young folks that are in rural areas, but also all across the state and the country, that are really disillusioned with politics right now. And I get that. I tell folks, I think if I hadn't become the Democratic Party chair, I might would have left the Democratic Party because I was so angry with how like the party kind of looks at rural communities. And I look at these areas, even in places where I know there's not heavy, marginalized populations in them that I think are our voters. Like I look at every rural area as a place of excitement and a place of hope and opportunity. And I know that a lot of folks don't look at them like that. But for me, I know that I grew up in a place that looked like it. I know that more people like me are out there in those areas. I know that there's more people that are part of the LGBTQ community in rural America, honestly, than what we're giving it credit for. And like when we're not tapping into those areas. And it's so funny, when I became Person County Democratic Party chair, the first couple that ever wrote me a $1,000 check, I was going to freak out because I'd never had someone give me that much money in my life before. And I was trying to, establish a field program to get these 3 city councilors that we had elected. And we did. We flipped a city council in Roxborough, right? And these 2 women that gave me this check for the first time, one of them had lived in Roxborough her entire life. And her partner, they looked at me and they said, I don't think that we're going to be able to retire here, Anderson. And I said, well, why not? Like your name is basically the phone book. You know what I mean? Like you own the phone book with that last name that you've got here. And she said, we can't walk into the Tractor Supply and yell, hey, sweetie, across the aisle at each other without covering our mouth like we just said a bad word. And I told them that day, I said, my job as a Democratic Party chair here is to make sure that you never have to feel that way again, because you have a community that's going to back you up, that's going to come out for you, and that's going to show out for you every time, and that's okay to do here. And if that's the only thing that I ever did as a party chair, it would have been successful to me. And from that, like we were able to build the momentum to win city council elections because people actually felt like we were speaking for them and listening to them. And I just think right now we're not doing that across rural America and in places where we have opportunities too. So sorry that's so long-winded, Richard, genuinely, but yeah.
No, I hear you. And speaking of LGBTQ issues, I mean, that's an interesting one for me too, because for example, the polling that I've seen of younger evangelicals, they're much more open to LGBTQ people. I mean, I think the assumption, evangelicals think it's a sin and this and that. I think there's an untapped reservoir there too of like, wait a minute, why are we like scapegoating certain people, right? But you said something that resonated with me, and I want to go back to it a little bit, which is because periodically you said, if it weren't for I was the chair, I might have left myself. I have left the Democratic Party at times and come back because I want to vote in the primary or I'm working on a campaign or whatever. But I do get frustrated, and one of the things I get really frustrated about is kind of what you said, which is there's a tone, okay? There is a tone, and it has to do with rural voters for sure, but it also has to do with a lot of working class voters that like, if you're not already with us, you're probably just not smart enough, or kind of, we shouldn't have to explain it to you. Look at our level of education versus your level of education. You should just take our word. It's a little bit of, I think maybe you know what I'm talking about, the way that,
I don't think that just comes from the Democratic Party, though. That's what I will say, Richard. I think it's both sides. I think both sides do that. They think voters are stupid. And I'm like, the one thing that I've learned is like, voters are not stupid. And that's kind of the thing when people look at me and they're like, Anderson, how do you know that North Carolina is not going to elect Mark Robinson in 2024? And I'm like, because rural folks are smarter than that. And I give them that credit. And I want people in this state to understand that like our electorate can still, and I'm not supposed to say a bad word on here, but we can still tell when somebody is telling us the wrong way. You know what I mean? I'm
right. You could say a bad word. It just means Troy has to do work afterwards to edit it out.
I'm like, but the phrase is, you can't bullshit bullshitters. And that's kind of my expression here from like rural folks. Like, you can't do that with us. And I just think that there's a real mentality to looking at an electorate as if they're dumb. And I'm just like, that's not
right. No, you're absolutely right. I completely agree. But of course, we're talking about the Democrats now, right? I mean, I think the Republicans have run a different, I don't think that, I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this, Anders, but I think that the Republicans are kind of scamming. I mean, they're just scamming them. They're just, I'm not saying Democrats, I mean, sometimes they scam them, but I just think there's a way of communication that sometimes doesn't sit well. This is one of the reasons why I think Joe Biden at his best has been good because he does not come across. That's why Bernie, my old boss, Bernie Sanders, did so well in places like West Virginia. Bernie got more votes in in some of the counties in West Virginia in the primary than Trump got in the general. And so you look at numbers like that and you say, well, if they don't think you're talking down to them, right, you can reach them. If they know that you respect them, and I will say that about Bernie and about other Democrats whose opinions I, agree less with, though. But, if they engage with voters and as you're talking human being to human being, to me that you've already won more than half the battle. And it seems to me that almost when your job, Democratic Party chair for North Carolina, it almost seems like you got to start at ground zero. Like, this is how we talk to people. You talk to people like they're not stupid. You talk to people like, if they knew the facts, which they don't often get, particularly in these places, they're watching Fox News, they're whatever, they're decent people, they're good people, they're smart people. If they don't vote the way you like, maybe they don't have the information they should have. So talk to them. You know what I'm driving at, don't you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that there's a whole part of our party, honestly, that does have a bit of an educational barrier to it, right? Like, folks will tell you or you can look it up. There's research that's done, like, most average Americans, right, are at a 5th grade reading level. And I think that sometimes we're so elevated and because policies that Democrats put out are hard. They're complicated and they're complex for reasons like that, because they are built on so much data and information, and they are about, 50 years from now and looking 50 years from now. And I tell folks, well, sometimes people can't look 50 years from now. They're trying to look 50 minutes from now about how to pay that bill, right? And that's the reality of most Americans. And I think that the Democratic Party is such a future forward party that we are thinking so far in advance sometimes about, like, what does the next transition of energy need to look like? What does the next economic phase of our country need to look like? That we're not necessarily sometimes as focused on, well, what's the right now look like for a lot of people? And I think for me, it's candidates, and we've got to run candidates that relate to folks and that can help folks understand. And in Person County, one of my city councilors, her name is Shayna Outlaw. She is a manager at McDonald's. She does not make $15 an hour yet. And she is somebody that's a single mom of 4 kids. Like, that is somebody who I'm like, Shayna is someone that's just relatable. Everyone sees her when they go through the McDonald's drive-through to get their after-school snack, or like there's somebody that people have seen her in the community just being an advocate and being someone that goes to city council meetings on their behalf. And I think it's finding more people like that, folks that never saw themselves running for office, folks that just have or something that they're passionate about, is what we need to do more of. We need to recruit better people to run for office.
You had me at the name Shayna Outlaw, by the way. I mean, it's like, I'd vote for her no matter what. But, and I think that, I will say, Anderson, that I think that sometimes Democrats overcomplicate their policies. Sometimes it ain't complicated. People need a living wage. People need to be paid for what they do. People need help when times are tough. No child should live in poverty. I mean, I think it's all there, right? I mean, I think, well, that's basically it. So, I know that one of the things, I've read your platform, it doesn't, and nor does it need to in this case, but I'm just curious, it doesn't really talk that much about policy. It talks more about, and you were running for chair, so this is understandable. It talks more about, what the party should do, right? And in terms of organization and that type of thing. But where does that fit into? And I'm not. I know there's division in the party, and you may not, you may not want to get involved in one side of that debate versus another. But do you have any thoughts on what policies would resonate best with voters in North Carolina that maybe they just don't even know about? Maybe it's gotten lost in all the noise. And, Democrats are, in the article about you in the New York Times, they quote a Republican who's like already like, he's not trustworthy in what he's going to say, but they quote a Republican consultant as saying, maybe it was a Democratic consultant actually, but they quote some consultants saying, Democrats like to talk too much about what we've done for you and not enough about what we're going to do for you. And I think that's right, because a lot of people have it tough right now. So I think when you talk to people like, hey, look what we did for you, it's like, my life sucks right now. What do you mean what you did for, and it may be real. They did do those things, but you got to say, we get it that you're suffering. Here's what we're going to do to make things better for you. And do you have any ideas of what might resonate, what would resonate most with voters in places like parts of North Carolina we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I had a guy earlier today, honestly, come knock on my door and at the NCDP headquarters here in Raleigh, and he said, I'm trying to figure out how to get this $35 insulin that Biden keeps talking about. Like, how do I do that? My wife is still paying $500 a month right now for insulin. And I said, well, like, are you getting the right, like, is the drug company that you're using Eli Lilly? Because they're the ones that have partnered with Biden on this to make sure that insulin is $35 a month, right? But it's things like that people, like, voters are not going to organically know, right? They know that this policy has come down, but how do you access it? Are insurance companies actually following through with it? And that's a party's job, I think, to come in and help tell voters, like, here's how you actually get these programs. Here's how the connection point from the top down is actually supposed to happen, because otherwise folks could still be getting taken advantage of, right? Or they don't know to ask those questions to their doctor. They don't know how to get the $35 a month insulin. And so for me, it's trying to make sure that we are, because that's the thing, Democrats have done a lot. Like, the Affordable Connectivity Program right now is $30 off a month of folks' internet bill if you make $44,000 in North Carolina, because that is 200% below the poverty line, right? And in rural North Carolina right now, Richard, folks are looking at me and they're going, Anderson, $30,000 or $44,000 a year is a job. Like, that's a lot of money, girlfriend. Yeah. And I'm going, well, it means you're poor by national standards right now because of how much inflation in the economy has changed over the last 5 years, right? Like, we are having a time where I think we need to put a number with what people are, like, with what we're associating with, and actually tell people, like, these policies that Joe Biden is talking about, like, that's talking about you at the end of the day. And it's hard for people to grasp that unless you have folks in these communities that are actively sitting there saying, here's what this program can do. Here's how you can sign up for it. We're here to help you do that. And that's where I think the Democratic Party has had a lack of, honestly, is being a party of service, being a party of, like, we are here to help you. And that's what we're going to do across North Carolina this year, is try to make sure that we have folks that are trained to help people get people signed up on these programs. Like, I want to take out what the Democrats have done well this year and actually campaign on it, because I think we can. There's not been an administration in 50 years that's looked at a place like Person County and said, you're worth investing in, except for Joe Biden. And so I'm like, if folks want to talk to me, and they can talk to me all they want to, I'll be honest with you, Richard, about, like, what you think or what you don't think of what this administration has done. But genuinely rebuilding rural economies does not happen without this money that they are putting into our country right now. And that, to me, is something I need folks to look at. And if you're in a rural area right now and you're wondering, where did this money go, Anderson? Your city council meetings, your county commissioner meetings, I need you to get to them, because they were allocated at least $3 to $5 million, maybe more, depending on the size of your county or your municipality, from the American Rescue Plan funding. There will be more money coming down from the bipartisan infrastructure bill into your communities. So I want folks to go out there and hold out your hands to your local municipalities and go, where'd my money go, guys? Like, that's coming down from Democrats at the federal level. And we need to understand how communities are supposed to be taking this money and making them thrive, because that's supposed to be the relief from the pandemic that we were just in, coming down from the federal administration. So where I sit politically, like, I've worked, I'll be honest with you, Richard, Bernie Sanders got me involved with politics. I was a big fan of him in 2016, and my mom was a big Hillary Clinton fan. And so her and I had a moment in our household, to be honest with you, but, like, a time to be alive. But I've also worked for Kamala Harris. I've worked for Amy McGrath. I worked for Elizabeth Warren. So, like, the spectrum is there, but I really want people to understand, like, I'm a progressive Democrat, but I also realize, like, progress is determined by your community and your district, and it should be. So, like, when people look at me and they go, Anderson, which direction do you want the party to go in, left or right? And I'm like, forward. And what does that look like in your backyard? What do you and your neighbors and your community decide that looks like? So
I got to tell you a quick story, Anderson, because it's about North Carolina. So my wife works for, pretty conservative people. And they were ragging on her when I was working for Bernie, right? And she and her boss took a business trip to North Carolina, and they they went to visit his 90-year-old mother, who used to be a sharecropper. And just to like tease his mother or get her upset, he said, you know who her husband works for, Mom? And she said, no, of course I don't know. And he said, Bernie. And my wife said that her like face just like lit up in this huge smile. And she said in this, deep accent, oh, I like Bernie. See, and my point in that being that, think about that. I mean, this guy was calling himself a democratic socialist, right? But he was offering things that people could understand. We'll get you the health care we need. And obviously that's where I fall politically too. But, too much of that, it's got to be, maybe other parts of the party don't want to give the things that I'd like to give, or maybe even you'd like to give, but make it straightforward, connect it, right? I mean, just be real about it, or say we can't do that. Say, we tried. I'll give you an example. I have a chronic disease too, and everybody said, "Oh, well, now Medicare, it's going to be free after I forget $2,000 or whatever." And they kept saying, "We did this. Well, not till 2026. That gap is going to cost me $15,000, $20,000." Now I know it, but why not just say, "Look, we tried to get it to you right away, but we couldn't." I mean, that to me is just being human, and to me, it's like, you guys are trying to be human.
Well, and I think like I've tried to offer at least as much as I can, the like honesty and authenticity in this job that like we can't expect to move mountains. And unfortunately politics it's incremental. And I'm impatient. Honestly, Richard, like that's why I tell folks all the time, like, I don't know how long I'm going to be in this job, to be honest with you, because it takes a long time to make change happen. But it's one of the things that I'm realizing about how do we educate people about the process of like, how do you make change and how can you get involved with it? Because I think that we need more honesty in politics. And I think we need more realism in it as well, instead of folks that are chasing things that aren't necessarily going to be able to happen, and we're over promising and under delivering every time. Because I think that that's one of the things that kind of crunches us as a party occasionally, is when we do that. And so I've tried to be really honest about like where we're at going into 2024 and what our party, I'll tell people every day, the North Carolina Democratic Party is on year one of our 10-year build back. Like it is ground zero for us right now, because we have had a lack of infrastructure. We haven't had a ton of investment in rural areas. And for me, people have asked me, how do you win back rural North Carolina? And I'm like, I don't win it back just over the next 2 years. Like I win it back over building up trust and a decade, hopefully, of rebranding our party to be a party of civic engagement and a party of service, and a party that, people come to this party because they have great ideas and they know that this is the party of the future and taking care of people. And I think that's the dream vision of this party that I want to build, is where folks can feel like their voices are heard everywhere. But I would love to see, I'll be honest with you, I think like Medicare for all is something I would love to see. I think that no one should have to pay an enormous amount, right, for their hospital bills or just to get good health care in this country. Right now, municipal broadband is not legal in North Carolina, and it should be, because broadband should be a public utility. It shouldn't be something where we're having to pay $100 a month to have internet access. Marijuana should be legalized in this state right now, and it's not, right? People have chronic pain all the time that could be solved with that, and like we're not actually giving it to folks, and the state legislature is stopping that. We just saw a rollback on women's rights and abortion rights in our state. I mean, right. The issues I find are endless, honestly. And I think that there's a lot of times in North Carolina in particular, and something I'm going to try to make the case of in our state legislature this year, is that, the Republicans are all about limited government. I'm like, the state has so much power over local governments right now that they cannot afford their own internet access or build out their own broadband, right? Like they can't, have a rent cap if they wanted one, or actually try to control building opportunities and in their own communities, because the state has made so many policies and laws against like local municipalities actually doing what's right for their communities. And so I think there's a lot for us to do this year in North Carolina, a lot to educate on. And all I know is that we're going to run full force at it every single time.
And how are you going to get the people? I mean, whether it's volunteers, staffers, you got a big job ahead of you, right? Because you've got to almost make it a movement that in some parts of the country, Democratic Party, well, it's how I vote or whatever, but this is more truly grassroots of, I feel like going out and knocking on doors or going to town council meetings or, whatever, going to the fair and sitting at a table and, can you get people excited enough to see this as a mission? Yeah, we want to help people. We're here to help people. I want to be a part of this.
I hope so. I think that we're already doing that, honestly, Richard, in some capacities. But I know that it's not going to be just me. And I think that has to be the other message that I give to people all the time is that, yes, I'm the new 25-year-old face of the Democratic Party, and I'm excited to be here, and I've got a lot of energy, but it can't just be me pushing this or me building this movement. And it's not. It's a ton of young people from across North Carolina, from every nook and cranny of this state that want to see something different, that want to see our state be better and want to build it better. And for me, that's going to come from our young Democrats out there in Western and Eastern North Carolina and that are populated all over our state who are just ready to take it back, honestly.
And you notice I didn't ask you any questions about being young, but I will ask you, do you run into old timers in politics there who say, who's the kid?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll be honest. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I walk into a room and no one knows I'm the state party chair. When I speak, they do know that I am the state party chair, though. So it is often fun to get to surprise people. Been able to pull one over on some people.
Well, good for you. Go get them. And where can people find out more about what you guys are doing in North Carolina?
Yeah, www.ncdp.org. Please find us, donate, get involved with us, sign up to run for office. We've had some crazy folks. And as we were talking about when we first got on here, we left 44 seats uncontested last cycle in North Carolina. We're not doing that again this year or next year, to be honest with y'all. So ncdp.org, you can sign up to run or also get involved with our local efforts this year.
Maybe my wife's boss's mom will run.
Now, come on.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you again. My guest has been Clayton. Anderson is the Democratic Party chair for the state of North Carolina. You got a big job. Best of luck with it. And thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you, Richard, for the time. I appreciate it.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.